Following her spanking, Vanessa was promptly diapered, swaddled, and returned to her crib for a nap. She noted drowsily that the remnants of last night's accident had been cleared away and replaced with fresh linen. She also noted a distinct crinkle that wasn't present the last time she'd been placed here, but she paid it little attention. Instead, she remained directly where she'd been placed and closed her eyes, her bottom gently throbbing inside her diaper. The tension and fear she'd experienced prior to going over Miss Mia's knee had disappeared, replaced instead with a deep and calming feeling of innocent submission. After the spanking had concluded, she had placed her hands inside the mittens to be willingly restrained while she had her temperature taken, and a soft, pillowy diaper taped about her backside. Feeling as she did, Vanessa would submit to whatever treatment Miss Mia decided to dispense. As she relaxed now into the welcome embrace of her crib, Vanessa felt the last of her fear and adult faculties slip away. Her mind being relaxed, her body followed suit, and she soaked her diaper for the very first time. Vanessa awoke to soft congratulations. Miss Mia lifted her from the tangle of blankets in her crib and inquiringly patted her on the bottom. The wet diaper gave a telltale squish under Miss Mia's large hand, and the woman responded with a soft noise of proud delight. The burn in Vanessa's backside had subsided, but the feeling of submission had not, and was rekindled by this small gesture. "Good afternoon, honey. Looks like someone had a big sleep," Miss Mia said, now proceeding down the hallway with Vanessa in her arms. "And from the looks of it, someone was a good girl and wet her diaper," she continued. "Good girl. Very good girl." Vanessa buried her face in the crook of her caretaker's neck, flushing with pride despite the unconventional nature of the compliment. It had been difficult for Vanessa to do the relaxing necessary to wet her diaper. It felt good to have that acknowledged, and so Vanessa allowed herself to enjoy this newfound pleasure. Miss Mia laid her down onto yet another changing table, and Vanessa slid her hands into yet another pair of mittens, these ones mint green. "All right, let's get you changed out of this wet diaper and back to see your friends." Vanessa's stomach immediately tied itself into a complicated mess of knots. Feeling comfortable wetting a diaper was one thing. Feeling comfortable in social situations was something different altogether. She'd say something weird or no one would understand her jokes or something, but none of them would want to be her friend. Logically, she knew that Piper was right, and that this shared experience would be nicer for all involved if they all went through it together. She knew that there was every chance she'd make friends. Unfortunately, social anxiety is in no way logical. "Do I have to?" she asked quietly as Miss Mia removed her sodden diaper and retrieved a fresh one. Asked Miss Mia. "Of course," she replied, to Vanessa's disappointment. "Why?" asked Vanessa, even softer. Because they're your group, sweetheart. They'll be missing you by now," said Miss Mia, lifting the small girl's legs into the air and sliding a blue and green fish-patterned diaper under her bottom. "They won't miss me." The diaper was taped securely. "Nonsense," said Miss Mia, placing Vanessa's legs back on the changing table and freeing her hands from the mittens. "Why wouldn't they want to be your friend? You're a lovely little girl." Miss Mia stooped to Vanessa's eye level. "Except I'm not. I'm weird and quiet, and there's no way they'll ever think I'm cool or want to hang out with me," thought Vanessa, her thoughts speeding up. "They're going to leave me out and I'll have nobody to talk to for a whole month." "Vanessa, I can see by the look on your face that your thoughts are spiraling," said Miss Mia. "Can you look at me, please?" she asked, authoritatively, and Vanessa brought her eyes up to look tentatively at Miss Mia. "Good girl," she said. Vanessa gave a small smile. "Why don't you think they'll want to be your friend, honey?" "'Cause," said Vanessa, beginning to twist her hands, "they'll think I'm a weird crybaby, and I want you to listen to me, honey, okay?" she asked, taking Vanessa's hands in her own to prevent the small girl from attempting to twist them free of her wrists. "You're not weird, and you're not a crybaby." Vanessa gestured frustratedly upward, then down, to the tear that had escaped her eye and her diaper, respectively. "You're having an emotion, baby. That doesn't make you a crybaby, and it definitely doesn't make you weird. Do you remember how scared you were yesterday?" asked Miss Mia. "Yeah, embarrassed," said Vanessa, who was still a little frightened, albeit slightly less so than yesterday, and still in a significant amount of embarrassment. "All of those guys in your group, they're all just as scared as you were. Not Piper," said Vanessa. "Even Piper was scared her first time here," said Miss Mia, still looking directly into Vanessa's eyes, which made her squirm. "Every one of those little ones out there knows what it's like to come here. How scary and embarrassing and big and emotional it is. So you all have at least one thing in common." Vanessa nodded, sniffling as she took in Miss Mia's words. Logically, she knew they were true. Miss Mia leaned in to kiss her on the forehead and scoop her from the changing table. "I know you're going to make friends, darling, but I know it's scary," said Miss Mia as they walked back towards the nursery. Vanessa nodded. Big and scary," agreed Miss Mia. "Talking to new people is very big and scary. But if you get overwhelmed, or if you get spinny thoughts while you're in the nursery, you can ask Miss Emily for some quiet time and she'll take you out of the playpen, okay?" The notion of quiet time quelled some of Vanessa's fears, and she relaxed slightly, though not entirely. Her heartbeat was still quick, and her mind still threatened to spiral, but she was grateful for the reassurance, and she smiled. "Thank you, Miss Mia," said Vanessa. "Vanessa's back!" called a boisterous voice. "Hey, Vanessa!" "Oh, hey, Vanessa!" "Hey!" A chorus of voices came from the playpen as Vanessa entered the room in Miss Mia's arms. The group was in the playpen, except for Frank, who sat across the room in Miss Emily's lap. She waved as they entered and approached the playpen. She was placed inside and once again kissed on the forehead. With that, Miss Mia left. Vanessa watched her walk out of the room, a small ache of inexplicable loneliness blooming in her chest. She sighed and turned towards the group. "I get it," said Piper, making absolutely no effort to lower her voice. "I had it bad for Ethan like 12 hours into my first day here." Vanessa flushed scarlet. "Shh! I don't have it bad. She looked back towards the nursery room door, trailing off. "Miss her and wish you were being held by her right now and your butt still hurts a little bit, but for some reason the fact that it's hurting less is making you sad?" asked Piper, knowingly. Vanessa stared at Piper, agape, wondering how this girl had managed to sum up her confusing feelings so succinctly. Did that mean the way she was feeling was common? Even normal? She felt fleetingly hopeful amidst the embarrassment. Vanessa nodded slowly. "Yeah, it's like that." "Oh, Vanessa!" exclaimed Piper. "That's having it bad. I don't have it. I don't have anything. I just think she's nice." "In that case, I don't have it bad either," declared Piper, taking a step towards Vanessa and draping an arm over her shoulder. "I just think Ethan's nice." "Miss Emily's nice," offered Aiden, not looking away from the block tower he and Danny were currently building. When Vanessa looked at him, she noted that the overalls he wore were now covered in grass stains. What did the group get up to in her absence? How long had she been gone? "See," said Piper. "Dennis agrees with me." "I've already told you my name's Aiden James Phillips," he countered, still focusing on the tower. "Yes, I know, and I've already told you I've renamed you Dennis." "In that case, we should get to change your name," said Danny, stretching to his full height to add to the tower. "What if we name you, I don't know, Spinach?" "Yeah, Or Jeff, said Aiden. Why Jeff? Asked Piper. Oh, no reason, I just think it's a funny name. Jeff. Aiden laughed to himself briefly, and once again busied himself with the tower. Alright, shrugged Danny. Jeff it is. Hey Jeff, do you want to come build with us? Quiet girl, you two? He asked. Vanessa's heart swelled at the inclusion and the continuing nickname. She sat on the floor and began to build a moat for the tower. The blocks gave her something to focus on, and her anxiety eased further. So, what did you all do while I was... Go on, she ventured timidly. Well, first, we checked out what was in that chest over there, said Piper, flinging a thumb over her shoulder. It's... Wait! Shouted Aiden, and was suddenly on his feet. He ran to the chest and knelt, opening it just a crack so Vanessa was unable to see inside. He reached inside and retrieved a pair of cat ears, which he promptly deposited onto Vanessa's head, giggling. They're costumes, he said exuberantly, and those are magic cat ears. They make it so you have to meow after every sentence. Vanessa, slightly bewildered from the sudden attention, was silent for a beat. Cool. Aiden clapped appreciatively. So, we dressed up for a bit, then played with Play-Doh, continued Piper. And then was the worst time ever, said Aiden, in an uncharacteristically dark tone. Wait, what time was that? Asked Danny. The lay down in the dark and don't move or talk to anyone time, said Aiden, an exaggerated frown creasing his freckled face. Vanessa, who could understand the frustration with Naptime's expectation of stillness, laughed. Then after we got up, we came here and played blocks, and Frank went to have quiet time, and then you came back, and then we all talked about how Miss Mia's nice, then we named Piper Jeff. Jeff. And now we're all playing blocks. Aiden finished, and continued to build higher. What did you do while you were gone and we were here? He asked. Dude, said Danny, motioning towards Vanessa with his eyes. What? Asked Aiden. We already know where she was, he said. Oh, right, said Aiden. So, how was it? It hurt, said Vanessa, not wishing to discuss the confusing emotions she'd experienced during her spanking. Yes, it had hurt, but it had also felt grounding and comforting in a way she hadn't ever reckoned on feeling. Not to mention the feelings of humiliation and vulnerability and a strange form of safety that came from being upended over a maternal lap. But wasn't that bad? The group looked at her expectantly. Vanessa blinked for a moment. Oh. Wasn't that bad? Exclaimed Piper, who smiled a genuine smile in Vanessa's direction and gave her a gentle push to the shoulder. See? We told you. That afternoon was pleasant, as was the evening, despite a growing discomfort in Vanessa's belly. They'd spent the last hour in the playpen idly tossing a ball back and forth. Vanessa's bottom continued to ache as Miss Emily applied cream to her behind during change time, and she wondered what the typical staying power of a scorched bottom was. Uh-oh, Miss Emily had said upon removing Vanessa's diaper and lifting her legs into the air. Someone looks like she still has a sore bottom. Vanessa, who had only just gotten used to intimate and pleasantly humiliating moments with one gargantuan caregiver, and who was fighting the urge to ask for the bathroom, attempted to reach down and cover her backside. The chains that attached her mittens to the headboard wouldn't permit such a thing, and they rattled as they were pulled tight. Miss Emily gave Vanessa a knowing look, then smiled warmly at the sheepish blush creeping across her cheeks. That's why you have mittens, cutie. I've got everything covered with my own hands. We don't need yours too. Miss Emily began to dab the cream onto the thoroughly heated skin of Vanessa's bottom. The small girl closed her eyes with as much force as she could muster. Whilst the act of having cream applied to her well-spanked backside stung her pride, Vanessa had to admit that it spoke to a deep urge inside of her. The urge to surrender, to submit to it all, everything, The temperatures, the diapers, the baths, the cribs, the spankings, and the care that went along with such loving discipline. The hugs, the stories, the little kisses on the forehead. The urge to let go of the social pressures and the weight of decisions and just be a good girl, cooed Miss Emily, taping Vanessa's diaper closed and fastening the snaps of her bodysuit. Vanessa's eyes opened suddenly, and she felt a small flutter of disappointment in her chest, along with the ongoing cramp in her stomach. Though not quite ready to admit it aloud, Vanessa was on the precipice of ceding to the urges she was feeling. Could it be that she liked it here? She needed to talk to Piper. If anyone was going to understand this feeling, it was her. But she didn't relish the thought of announcing this feeling to the entire group. Miss Emily set Vanessa back down in the playpen. Aiden gave her a wave and turned his attention back to the game of catch he was playing with Danny. Piper was dozing in her usual spot. Frank, wrapped in a blanket, hid his face. Vanessa waddled to a corner of the pen with a low-set plastic table that held craft supplies. She sat down and began to pen a note with a bright green crayon on a piece of scrap paper. Dear Piper, I was wondering if I could please talk to you about something in private. I'm having some feelings and I was hoping I could talk to you about them. No pressure if not, but I figured I'd ask. Thank you, Vanessa. Once she was done, she snatched 2 more sheets of paper from the pile. She folded them, and after checking for any watching eyes, concealed one down her diaper. Her crayon followed suit, and she held a second set of pilfered stationery against her chest. Almost as soon as the crayons were sequestered, Mr. Ethan entered the room and strode to Miss Emily's side. Vanessa knew that she needed to act fast if she would be able to deliver her note, though her stomach churned at the notion of waking a relative stranger from a nap. As quickly and quietly as she could, Vanessa stole across the playroom and crouched down beside the big bear that Piper had her arms wrapped around. Piper, whispered Vanessa. Piper, wake up. Piper stirred and looked up in Vanessa's direction, through squinting eyes. Huh? What's going on? Sorry, said Vanessa, hurriedly. It's just that Mr. Ethan's here and I had to give you this. Vanessa held out her note, a folded sheet of paper, and the crayon. Piper blinked and snapped to attention, hiding the writing implements in the same fashion that Vanessa had moments ago. Vanessa smiled gratefully at Piper, who returned the expression, along with a thumbs up. One by one, all of the caretakers arrived to collect their charges. Dr. Gilbert scooped up Frank, still bundled in his blanket. Mickey took Danny's hand. Mr. Ethan retrieved Piper. Miss Mia appeared in the doorway, and Vanessa felt her heart leap. Stop it, she chided herself internally. You're not having a good time. This shouldn't be fun. After the little ones had been fed, Mia, Dr. Gilbert, Mickey, and Emily consulted the monitors. They watched as the group, more or less obediently, sat down in a semicircle before Mr. Ethan, who held up a picture book with a cartoon pirate on the cover. So, Miss Mia, began Mikey, a cheeky smile toying on his lips, your little one and Pipe are writing notes. I wonder what that could be about. I know what it is, said Mia and Emily almost simultaneously. They each looked at the other in surprise. Emily held up a hand, signifying for Mia to elaborate. Vanessa, said Miss Mia, pausing as if to select a diplomatic phrase, responded very well to discipline. Oh? Asked Emily, her head tilting towards Mia. She was frightened, and she fussed some, said Mia, folding her hands in her lap, a proud smile on her face. But she was brave, and she took her spanking very well. Dr. Gilbert quirked a grin. I'm not shocked she was scared, said Mickey. You're the scariest one. Mia glanced down at her form, a cameo pin on a white lace-collared blouse that tucked into a floral pencil skirt. Stockings, sensible shoes. She turned a confused look upon Mickey and gestured to her clothing. Yes, I am clearly terrifying, she said. "You don't look scary, but you can be," said Mickey, leaning back on his chair and purposefully avoiding eye contact with Dr. Gilbert, who was becoming increasingly exasperated. "You're stricter than Gil." "I am stern, Michael," said Mia, looking down at the slender young man with a mixture of kindness and mild reproach. "I am not scary." "You ask me, those two are the same thing," said Mickey, giving a comically exaggerated shudder, followed by a genuine one as Dr. Gilbert clamped a hand on his shoulder. "Regardless," began Dr. Gilbert, "it appears that firm discipline is something the little one responds to," he finished, looking meaningfully at Mickey, who laughed nervously. "I wonder what that's like." "I can behave," protested Mickey. "You can, but you don't," was the curt response to a round of soft laughter from the others and an exaggerated sulk from Mickey. "And what were you going to say?" asked Mia, turning towards her colleague, who appeared to be lost in thought. "Well, it's a few things," she said. "Today, when I was changing her diaper," she said, "she squirmed at the beginning and squeezed her eyes closed, but as soon as I gave her some rash cream," Emily clicked her fingers, "she settled right down. She relaxed completely, as if she was drifting off to sleep." Emily smiled a quiet, private smile. "She looked kind of shaken when I finished changing her and snapped her back into her onesie. Almost like she hadn't wanted it to end." The pride was evident in Mia's resulting smile. "Good girl, Vanessa," she murmured. "Oh, and there's something else," continued Emily. "I almost had to go into another room and have a moment to myself. It was just so sweet. When you brought her back this afternoon, after you put her in the pen and left, she stood in that exact spot and watched the door for about 2 minutes. "Mia, she missed you!" cried Mickey. "Oh, that's so sweet!" If her programming had allowed for it, Mia would have been simply overcome with emotion for the little girl who had been entrusted to her. As it was, she covered her mouth with a single hand and grinned into it. "Good girl, Vanessa. Very good girl." As the caregivers returned to collect the little ones, Mia's mind was consumed with thoughts of her tiny, anxious charge. Though proud of the child's astonishing leaps of progress, Mia worried of the obstacles to come. One in particular loomed largest. Vanessa had not yet made full use of her new undergarments. Given the amount of time the girl had spent so far in the park and the meals she'd consumed, Mia's concern swelled. That morning, she'd conferred with the doctor over this matter. Gilbert had not shared Mia's level of concern. However, he proposed a course of action. "Her appointment with me is tomorrow afternoon," he said, reasonably. "I say we wait until then. If she's not gone yet, or if she's complaining of stomach pain, then we can see about giving her some help." Mia didn't labor under the impression that Vanessa would appreciate such help, though she knew it was necessary. Nevertheless, Mia's stomach gave a sick lurch at the thought. "Don't panic, my friend," said Gilbert, giving his colleague a pat on the shoulder. "Your girl is in safe hands." Vanessa, whose stomach continued to cramp ominously through her evening bottle and story time, began to worry. For lack of a better phrasing, she was feeling fussy. But still, she refused to give in to the growing pressure in her abdomen. She clamped her eyes and legs together as tightly as she could muster once she'd been placed into her crib and given the now customary goodnight kiss on the forehead. The next morning, the pressure in her stomach had been replaced with a strange heaviness, as if she'd eaten a handful of rocks rather than the yogurt she'd actually been given. It bothered her, but the immediate urge had left, and she was glad. She was not ready to voluntarily do that. That day, Miss Emily was taking the group to the park. It was the first time that Vanessa had ventured outside the central building that housed them until then, and she was partly curious to see what lay beyond. The part that wasn't curious, however, was anxious. and it speculated wildly. Whatever is out there, it can't be good, she thought. The building with the nursery and her bed, she was still unable to bring herself to call it a crib, was fine enough for her. She didn't need swashbuckling adventures or whatever else the brochure had promised. Vanessa had already had quite enough adventure, and she didn't feel able to experience anything new with a belly full of rocks. "Outside!" cried Aiden. "Outside! Outside! Outside! It's outside!" he sang, punctuating the melody with balled fists on the bars of his crib. "That's right, little ones, we're going outside," said Miss Emily, now addressing the entire nursery. Frank sat up sleepily, his blonde hair cowlicked, an aggravated expression on his face. "What?" he asked. "Outside!" yelled Aiden, positively bouncing out of his sleeping quarters and into Miss Emily's arms. "Inside voice, darling," reminded Miss Emily as she carried him down the passage. As she passed Frank's crib, she leaned in, smiling conspiratorially, and whispered, "We're going to the park." "Yay," said Frank, in a flat tone. "Yay!" cried Aiden, in a genuine one. Though Vanessa was cautious at the prospect of visiting the park, she was still gladdened that Aiden was so enthusiastic. Though, to be fair, Aiden seemed to be enthusiastic about most things. "Oh yeah! Yogurt! Ah! Yeah! Trucks! All right, these overalls have so many pockets!" The only things that Aiden James Phillips seemed to dislike, so far, were spankings. Spankings and naps. Dr. Gilbert entered the room and interrupted Vanessa's train of thought. "Good morning," he spoke, his low voice seeming to rumble through Vanessa's bones. "Good morning, Gil," said Piper, grinning cheekily. The resultant look of stern reproach that he turned upon her was so swift that Piper's grin immediately disappeared. "But," she finished in a contrite voice. The doctor looked at her amusedly and inclined his head slightly. "You and I will be having a talk about that at your appointment today," he said mildly, and Piper's eyes nearly grew to the size of saucers. "No!" she cried. "I said I was sorry!" "No, you didn't," said Frank, who was being lifted from his crib by Mickey. "I wasn't talking to you, Francois," Piper shot back with a glare. "I am sorry, though," she mumbled. "I know," said Dr. Gilbert in a tone that wasn't unkind, "and we'll discuss how sorry you are at your appointment." "Yes, sir," mumbled Piper, fiddling with her blankets, her lower lip between her teeth. "And speaking of appointments," said Dr. Gilbert, turning towards Vanessa's cubicle, causing her to blanch. He strode inside and crouched at her crib, turning his soft, black-rimmed eyes onto Vanessa. Vanessa knew, logically, that there was nothing to fear from this man, imposing as he seemed. But he was big, and he was a doctor, a profession that Vanessa had a particular aversion to. "It's also your turn to see me today, little miss." Vanessa quaked beneath her blankets, and desperately shook her head. This was not welcome news. "Ah, I'm afraid so," he said, nodding. "Mickey will come to collect you from the park this afternoon, and you're to be a good girl for him." "Please, no," whispered Vanessa. I can't. You can't be a good girl for Mickey?" he asked, wryly, tilting his head in mock confusion. "No," cried Vanessa in genuine dismay. I can be good, but I can't go to the..." Vanessa, too overcome for speech, covered her mouth with her blanket. This is a jumper. We put all our blankets away. It got hot. Thanks, Queensland. Vanessa, too overcome for speech, covered her mouth with her blanket. She began to chew on the soft fabric, the action instantly bringing a small amount of relief to her growing anxiety. To the doctor, and you can, and you shall, said the doctor. Your Miss Mia tells me that you are very brave and strong. Dr. Gilbert reached out and gently removed the blanket from between Vanessa's teeth. But she didn't tell me about this. He gestured to the now sodden corner of the blanket. Perhaps you aren't a baby after all. Perhaps you've been a little puppy this whole time. Vanessa's heart swelled at the compliment, and she smiled at the comparison, but still she shook her head. She didn't feel strong. I believe her, he said, an earnest expression on his face. I know a strong, brave little girl when I see one. Vanessa flushed, not feeling very brave either. She set her jaw and remained silent beneath her blanket. I will see you this afternoon for your checkup, little pup, though I am not a vet. Miss Mia wasn't swayed by Vanessa's tears, nor the begging to be spared from her appointment. All the little ones need a checkup, honey, she said, as she bundled the crying girl, now dressed in a set of floral denim dungarees, into her arms. You're going to be perfectly safe. No, I won't, said Vanessa, morosely from beneath her sun hat, which bore a large daisy on the front. I know you're scared, baby girl, but yes, you will. I trust Gilbert to look after you. I won't go, said Vanessa, stubbornly. Yes, you will, said Miss Mia, lightly, manoeuvring out of the room with her arms full of park supplies and one sullen little girl. I won't. I'll run away, muttered Vanessa, who had no intention of doing any such thing. Said Miss Mia, looking sternly down upon her charge as they walked. And you know exactly what will happen if you do. I won't have to go to the doctor, scowled Vanessa. You know very well that you'd still be going to your appointment. You'd just be going with a sore bottom. Vanessa gaped and had no response for this. Miss Mia continued, a bottom that would only get sorer for making Dr. Gilbert wait. Vanessa stared up at her caregiver in horror, her eyes widening. No, he can't! He can, and he would. The doctor is very particular about being on time, and if he found out why you were late, then he absolutely would turn you over his knee. But he can't. He's not my... You're my... Only you can... spluttered Vanessa. Miss Mia shook her head. Yes, I'm your caregiver, and I'll see to your discipline for the most part, said Miss Mia, who had paused just as she reached the door leading outside. But if you disobey anyone else, then they have my full permission to render the consequences. Vanessa considered this for a moment, and ceased squirming in Miss Mia's arms. Then she made up her mind to never, ever find herself over Dr. Gilbert's knee. She would try her level best to swallow her fear and to behave. I'll go, she said softly, resting her head against Miss Mia's chest. Miss Mia leaned down and placed the gentlest of kisses upon Vanessa's brow. That's my girl. Outside was simply enormous. If the nursery room had made Vanessa feel dwarfed, then a single tree in the outside world made her feel microscopic. They appeared to be in a quaint township, with wide, paved, tree-lined roads leading to a plethora of destinations. The buildings were a mixture of masonry and wood, many of them painted pastel colours. The air was sweet and mildly perfumed with flowers, and the soft sounds of birds hummed happily in her ears. She could see the sea in one direction, and in another, Way off in the distance, snow-capped mountains stretched up to meet the sky. Despite the rocks in her stomach and the looming threat of her appointment, Vanessa's heart fluttered. She had never seen snow before. The park was a maze of cobblestone pathways and delicately manicured flower beds. She could see a large field off to the left, and up ahead was an equally large play fort with a flag waving merrily from its tallest spire. The group was sitting beneath a large tree, listening patiently to Miss Emily, who spoke animatedly and sported a sun hat of her own that was much like Vanessa's. "All going to stick together," she said emphatically, and she glanced at Piper. "Vanessa! Honey, I adore your hat," said Miss Emily, beaming at the sulky little girl, who began to feel her sulkiness dissipate in the warm spring air. "That reminds me, where do our hats live?" she asked, this time directed at Danny, who was sheepishly returning his hat to his head. "On our heads," he said, giving a tiny, abashed smile. "On our heads. That's exactly right. Good boy," she said, clapping her hands. "You'll all get 3 hat warnings." "Then what?" asked Aiden, flinging his hand skyward. Asked Miss Emily. "Then what? Then what happens after we've had 3 warnings?" "Oh, the worst punishment imaginable," she said, kneeling down to look the little ones directly in the eye. Aiden gave a soft gasp. "What's that?" he asked. "You'll have," Miss Emily paused for dramatic effect, "to sit in the shade with me." Vanessa fought the urge to take advantage of Miss Emily's threat in order to avoid socialization. She didn't have to fight long. Within a minute of being let loose on the playground, Piper had grabbed her hand and led her behind the play fort. "You didn't respond to my note!" "Note?" "Yes, my note. I put it in your crib this morning." Vanessa looked blankly at Piper, not recalling seeing such a note when she awoke. To be fair, Vanessa wasn't at her best in the mornings and likely wouldn't have noticed a bear chewing through the bars. It just said, "Okay, what about?" So, "Okay, what about?" "Well," began Vanessa, slowly reddening. "I don't know if I can say this out loud." "Ah, not a problem, my little friend," she said, reaching into her diaper, to Vanessa's surprise and mild alarm. She produced the crayon and some scrap paper. "I figured you wouldn't want to talk about it out loud. Or else you would have just said something instead of sending a note." Piper gave an affable little shrug, and Vanessa liked her for it. Piper nodded and motioned for Vanessa to begin writing. Vanessa turned and, using the play equipment to brace herself, began to write. She scrawled in a shaky hand, with a rapidly blunting crayon. "I have a crush on Miss Mia." So, who doesn't? Vanessa gave Piper an unimpressed frown. "Seriously though, there's nothing wrong with that. Remember, I told you I had a bad for Ethan." "Yeah, but that's different." "How's it different?" You wanted to come here?" "Ah, but maybe there was a part of you that wanted to as well." "I mean, I don't like the diapers. I just like being looked after, having no responsibilities." "Yeah, it's kind of nice not to have to make any decisions." "Yeah, that's what's great about it. Takes all the guesswork out of life. What am I going to do today? Have some food? Maybe play a game? Sleep in the middle of the day? Yeah, most likely. And also be spanked and have to pee myself. Ah, and poop," said Piper, brightly. Vanessa grimaced, the rocks in her stomach giving a timely lurch. She didn't usually go this long without visiting the bathroom. She knew it would have to come out eventually, but she couldn't face the possibility here, at the park, surrounded by people. Piper gave Vanessa a knowing look. "You know, you're gonna have to go sometime." "I've got no idea what you're talking about." "Seriously, the longer you hold it in, the worse it's going to get." "I I've been constipated before, said Vanessa quickly before she'd had a chance to feel shame at the topic of conversation. Her grimace returned. That's not what I mean, explained Piper, in a tone she no doubt believed to be patient. You've got the doctor this afternoon. Vanessa gave a shudder. Please don't remind me, I'd almost forgotten about it. Well, you should probably think about it. And you should probably think about what's going to happen when he finds out it's been days since you pooped. If he doesn't already know. And that your tummy hurts. Vanessa felt the colour drain out of her face. I don't know why I have to tell you people these things so many times. They know everything. Oh no. Oh no. Oh no, said Vanessa, her shaking head dropping into her hands as she slid down the climbing frame to sit on the ground. I'm sorry, said Piper, repeating the motion and sitting next to Vanessa in the bark. What do they do? Piper, you have to tell me. What are they gonna do? Well, I don't know exactly, but I can guess. If I had to bet on it, I'd say they go at it from both ends. I am not doing that! Nothing is going to make me do that! You kind of have to, unless you want to try to hide. Vanessa raised her head and looked interestedly at Piper, who was once again twirling a braid around her ring finger. And, once again, she had a maddeningly patient expression on her face. But of course, you know it already, and I don't have to repeat what I just said. Vanessa was not listening. She was scanning the terrain. Do you remember, Vanessa, what I just said? The thing about them knowing everything? I don't care. Nothing else is going up there. Again, she realized too late what her sentence implied, and she groaned, her cheeks growing pink. All right then. I'm coming too. No, you're not. Why should you get in trouble too? I'm already cooked. My appointment's this morning. I might as well have some fun with it, said Piper as she pointed to a nearby tree. Okay, so that tree is entirely out of Miss Emily's eye line. What's out of Miss Emily's eye line? Aiden James Phillips crinkled into view, grass stains all over his overalls. Shh, said Vanessa and Piper simultaneously. Piper grabbed Aiden by the shoulder and pulled him into the shade behind the playground. No way, the two of you can't both come. It's too late. The boy knows too much. Well, I wouldn't say that. But really, what's happening? We're hiding from our doctor's appointment. Come on, she said, hightailing out of their hiding space and making a beeline for the tree. After a moment's pause, Vanessa crouched as low as she could and followed her. Aiden followed at a casual pace. Hurry up, we've got to be fast. Miss Emily took Danny and Frank to the change room. They fell in a puddle, said Aiden, gesturing behind them to where Miss Emily and two mud-covered boys were disappearing into what appeared to be a toilet block. Vanessa relaxed for a moment. Yeah, Mickey said he'd watch us. Aiden! He's here to get Piper! Oh. Quick, get on my shoulders! Get up the tree! Vanessa had no time to worry about the height of the tree. She refused to go to the doctor, and so she needed to do this. Piper crouched, and Vanessa climbed into place. Piper stood, and Vanessa was able to grab a branch to swing onto. Keep going higher! Hissed Piper, and Vanessa obliged, making slow progress. She hadn't climbed a tree in almost a decade, and even then she hadn't enjoyed it. As she climbed higher into the branches, she risked a look over her shoulder. Mickey had reached Miss Emily's park bench and had taken a seat. He didn't appear to have noticed them at all. By the time Piper had repeated the process with Aiden, who had a slightly easier time climbing the tree, Vanessa had made it to some 9 feet off the ground. After Aiden was safely in the branches of the tree, Piper kicked off her shoes and expertly shinnied up the trunk. How did you do that? Asked Aiden, mouth agape, as Piper joined the others in perching on a branch. Vanessa's adrenaline was beginning to wear off, and her distaste for heights had returned. "It's just a tree," said Piper, simply, as if that answered the question. "Now hush, they're probably gonna notice soon." Vanessa hugged the trunk of the tree and pinched her eyes shut. They couldn't find her. She wouldn't go, she wouldn't. "I still don't understand why we're hiding. My appointment wasn't so bad." "Shh, whisper. Sorry, my appointment wasn't so bad." "Hers will be. If only Vanessa's appointment is gonna be bad. Why are we all up this tree? I like to climb trees, and you're a liability." The trio in the tree crouched in silence behind the leaves and watched the others down below. Miss Emily came out of the bathroom and greeted Mickey, who stood with a wave. After a brief conversation, Mickey turned towards the play fort, which sat approximately 50 meters from the base of their vantage point. Vanessa hoped their hiding spot would serve an effective purpose, but a sinking feeling in her stomach told her otherwise. "Piper! Pip! Come here, please!" When his call wasn't answered, Mickey proceeded closer. "Come out, Pip! It's time for your appointment!" They saw Mickey glance at Miss Emily, who began to look about her. The two caregivers did a circle around the play fort, their expressions growing more concerned as they did so. "I can't see her anywhere. I can't see any of them, actually," said Mickey, retreating in the opposite direction. Hope filled Vanessa's heart as they walked away from the tree. "That's it, I'm getting the doctor," came Mickey's voice, and Vanessa's heart sank. "Aha! Surprise! I got you guys! You thought there was only gonna be one chapter? Well, there's 2 chapters! Ah ha 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 ha! Pranked! All of the numbering is off kilter. So you've just heard chapter 12. I think I said it was chapter 11. I can't remember. I'm sorry. So you just heard chapter 12. This is chapter 13 of Littleland. "Piper, Aiden, and Vanessa, come out. And quickly, please," called the doctor, who now stood in the middle of the field. His dark outfit was a stark contrast to the greenery around him. Worry creased Miss Emily's face, and they could see Mickey reach aside and pat her on the back. Dr. Gilbert's face remained a stern mask, neutral and impassive. He called again. "Little runaways, come out now. Do not make me fetch you." A moment's wait, listening to the air, and the doctor began to stroll towards the playground, collected yet imposing as ever. Vanessa gave a shiver. It seemed borderline impossible to ignore the calm authority in Dr. Gilbert's low voice. Vanessa had to hug the tree trunk with even greater force to prevent herself from obeying. Dr. Gilbert had bypassed the playground entirely and was walking with what seemed like purpose towards the stand of trees in which they hid. Vanessa's heart leapt into her throat. From beside them came a crinkle and a muted crunching sound. Startled, both Vanessa and Piper turned their heads to find that the noise's source was Aiden James Phillips, unwrapping a biscuit. Aghast, and acting without consideration, Piper reached out and slapped the biscuit from Aiden's hand. He looked at her, appalled. "Hey!" he cried, dropping all pretense of stealth in the wake of biscuit loss. "Why would you think right now is a good time to eat a fucking biscuit?" The sound of a throat clearing came from below them. Indeed. All 3 froze. Nobody spoke. "Give up the pretense now," said Dr. Gilbert, staring directly up at them with his hands on his hips. "I know you're up there. It would be best if you came down." Vanessa shook her head, her fists balled tightly. This was bad. The 3 looked amongst themselves. Vanessa shook her head once more. Piper shrugged, then called down to the caregivers with a comical smile on her face. "Why?"
don't need to explain myself, Piper. I asked you to come down. That's all you need to know.
But I don't want to. It's so nice up here.
I am going to count to 3, began the doctor, to Vanessa's horror. She couldn't believe that she'd gotten herself into this situation.
I think I've made a mistake,
she whispered. Piper looked at her in concern. 1.
Do you want to get down? I don't like being counted at either. My tummy hurts. I need to get down.
2.
Wait! Dr. Gilbert, wait!
Yes, Piper?
Vanessa's tummy hurts.
Dr. Gilbert shared a look with the others, sudden realization dawning. And might this be because someone hasn't gone potty in quite a while? Piper looked at Vanessa, who squirmed miserably.
Maybe.
And might this tree climbing be related to that?
I can neither confirm nor deny,
replied Piper, diplomatically. I see. And might that someone with a sore belly like to come down from there and get some medicine for said sore belly?
You have to promise something first.
Aiden's eyes widened at her audacity and stole a look down at Miss Emily. She looked up at them with a mixture of relief and disappointment. Aiden felt a nauseous, spinning feeling blooming in his gut. I shall do no such thing.
You have to promise that you won't spank us.
I shall definitely do no such thing. You'll be lucky if you're not put over a knee the second your feet touch the ground. You're in big trouble, little girl.
Can't spank us all at once.
Dr. Gilbert looked over each of his shoulders in turn at Mickey, and then Miss Emily.
Nice try. Mickey doesn't spank anybody.
Piper relaxed against the trunk in victory. Didn't. Piper, try him right now. Piper gaped, as if several emotions were emerging at once, and she wasn't yet sure how to feel. Vanessa and Aiden, less affected by the news that Mickey intended to spank Piper, looked on nervously. So, you have 2 options, as I see it. You can do as I say, be good little ones, climb down from there, and face the consequences. Dr. Gilbert paused, affixing his stern attention on each individual runaway. Or you can wait for me to get a ladder and retrieve you myself. The trio shifted discomfortedly. Nobody moved. And I can promise you that the consequences will be far more severe should I have to go up there and retrieve you. Piper, last on the branch, slunk down first, followed by Aiden. Vanessa lurched across the branch, the inertia of the situation having only just caught up to her. This was way too high, way too dangerous. Even worse, she had broken Miss Mia's big rule. So if you ever get it in your mind to do something that dangerous ever again, this is where you'll end up. Miss Mia's words echoed in her head as she attempted to navigate the notion of climbing down from her hiding place. The gaps between branches seemed so much bigger now than they had been when she was climbing up. She was going to be in so much trouble. Miss Mia would be so disappointed in her. Her stomach cramped painfully, and her eyes welled with tears. Vanessa was terrified that the doctor would take her snail's pace as insolent. But she bit back the urge to cry out an apology, and instead concentrated on the descent. And in a moment of sick surprise, Vanessa's foot slipped. Her balance was tipped, and she was plummeting. As she fell, her stomach gave an almighty cramp. She let out a cry of true terror, and the mass she'd been holding back emptied into her diaper. Vanessa didn't have the time to register that fact before coming to a safe rest in Dr. Gilbert's arms. Vanessa trembled there, overcome with fear. All in all, Vanessa had only fallen less than 2 meters, but it lasted an eternity to the little girl. She looked around her, upward to the branch that tripped her, and finally at the man who caught her. He looked down upon her with a deeply furrowed brow, which lifted in relief as he did, and saw her unharmed. The reality of the situation caught up to her. She'd climbed a tree to escape a doctor's appointment. She'd fallen from said tree, and she'd made a mess of her diaper. Her heart beat fast, adrenaline coursing through her body. She took a deep breath in and began to cry. Hard. Vanessa burrowed deeper into the large man's embrace, and he held the little girl close as she sobbed. The little ones were led back inside. They were brought to the nursery and placed within the playpen. Dr. Gilbert took Vanessa, too upset to notice, into the changing room and rocked her there for several minutes. She had begun to breathe more steadily. One large palm rubbed circles on her back. The other supported her bottom. The doctor laid her down upon the changing table. Vanessa's eyes remained closed. She could feel herself surrendering, slipping into that soft, pliable, vulnerable headspace as he removed her soiled and sodden nappy.
That's it. Good girl. Nice big deep breaths for me. That's it. Good girl.
His little affirmations rained down upon Vanessa and kindled a warm fire in her heart. Eventually, by the time Dr. Gilbert had wiped away the last traces of her accident, Vanessa's tears dried up and her breathing was even. Her eyes opened cautiously as the doctor affixed the last tape of a clean, fluffy diaper. She gazed sleepily around her, feeling the smallest she'd felt since her arrival at this place.
There we go. Are we feeling better?
Murmured Dr. Gilbert, lifting her from the pad and cradling her in his arms. Vanessa did feel better. The cramping, scraping feeling inside her belly had disappeared and was replaced with a gentle fluttering. It was a happy feeling, a comfortable feeling. She had survived her first messy diaper. Where she expected to feel shame, she felt pride. She'd done it. The doctor returned her to the nursery, and Vanessa took a deep breath. It was time to face the consequences. Vanessa stood trembling between Piper and Aidan as they faced Dr. Gilbert, who stood before them with his considerable arms crossed over his considerable chest.
I would like to hear what happened.
Well, I was a liability, so I had to go up the tree. Dr. Gilbert looked quizzically at the little boy, who glanced around him, not appearing to notice the peculiarity of his last sentence. Mickey stifled a grin.
From the beginning, if you please.
I didn't want to go to my appointment, so I suggested we hide. Vanessa tried to interject, but was cut off. I knew I was going to be in trouble, so I convinced Vanessa to climb a tree with me. Aidan James Phillips really was a liability. We had to take him with us or he'd blab. Not on purpose, interjected Aidan, defensively. Vanessa squirmed, disliking the fibs immensely. She couldn't let Piper take the blame for this. She wouldn't. Dr. Gilbert appeared to notice her inner turmoil. Vanessa, is there something you would like to say?
It wasn't Piper's fault.
Vanessa forced herself to look directly into the doctor's eyes.
It wasn't Aidan's either.
Piper elbowed Vanessa in the ribs and shot her a rapid glance. It said,
Let me do this.
In any other situation, Vanessa's anxiety would have entirely prevented her from speaking in front of such a somber, hulking man. In this instance, Vanessa's anxiety was outmatched by her conscience. Piper had helped her today. Piper was her friend. Vanessa couldn't bear to see her friend take the blame. Would you like to tell me your version of events?
I needed to talk to Piper, so we went behind the playground, and my tummy started hurting,
said Vanessa, not wishing to admit why. Ah, And why did it hurt? Vanessa took a shaky breath in and locked her eyes onto her shoes. She remained silent. I'll thank you to answer my question, little miss. Because I didn't go to the toilet, said Vanessa in a very small voice. Her eyes remained on the floor. Look at me. Vanessa's lower lip trembled. It took every ounce of strength she possessed, but Vanessa managed to raise her green eyes to meet his grey ones. Because I didn't go to the toilet. Ah, yes. It's not good to hold it in, little one. No, said Vanessa, miserably, and bravely continued. Then Papa said you'd have to help me if I didn't go. I didn't want you to put anything up my bottom, so I decided to hide. A single tear snuck out of Vanessa's left eye and left a glassy trail down her face. Piper told me not to. She tried to get me to be good, but I went to hide instead. Vanessa looked at her friend with eyes full of remorse and gratitude. She shouldn't be in trouble. I went with you. I didn't have to go, but I wanted to. And I made Aiden come too. It's my fault he's here. I was just happy to be included. Dr. Gilbert held up a hand. I'm afraid that's not for you to decide, little girls. It's up to us. He gestured to the other two caregivers who sat off to the left, and I'd say we'd all agree you're in need of some discipline. Vanessa sighed inwardly. She knew what was coming, but still her stomach coiled into tight knots of humiliation at the notion. Wouldn't you? He asked, regarding them with eyes that were uncompromising yet kind. The three of them each mumbled out their yeses in turn. I thought so. What the three of you did today was extremely dangerous and very naughty. I never want to have a repeat of what happened today, ever again. Am I making myself perfectly clear, little ones? Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir, replied all three in tremulous voices. And if I need to have this conversation about climbing trees ever again, I promise you that you will not sit for 3 days. Vanessa blanched. Piper set her jaw. Aiden stole a glance at Miss Emily, who smiled sympathetically at him. Dr. Gilbert let his words sink in for a few moments before he spoke again. Piper, you will come with Michael and I. You are late for your appointment. Piper nodded soberly, her usual exuberance considerably diminished. Vanessa, Aiden, you will stay here with Miss Emily and have some quiet time. Then, to her discomfort, he addressed Vanessa singularly. And I will be back to collect you in an hour, little girl. You're to behave yourself till then. Am I understood? Yes, sir. I'll be good. Vanessa spent the next hour in what can only be described as a mental frenzy until Miss Emily entered the playpen and noticed her facial expression. Vanessa was scooped from the playpen floor and bundled into Miss Emily's lap, where she was rocked and gently comforted until the doctor returned, sans Piper. Vanessa desperately wanted to inquire as to her whereabouts, but bit her tongue. Vanessa was transferred from one set of arms to another, and was promptly carried away from the nursery. Okay, little one, said Dr. Gilbert softly. It's time for your appointment. I'm sorry, she whispered, with her face pressed into his chest. I do not have ears in my chest, sweetheart, he said, smiling a dry smile down at her. Vanessa looked up in his direction and managed to return a small, pale imitation of his expression. "I'm sorry I tried to run away," she said. "That's very good, little one," said Dr. Gilbert. "I appreciate your apology." The doctor opened the door that led to the infirmary. It was a white room, sparklingly clean and smelling of fresh lemon disinfectant. Mickey stood at the opposite end of the room, washing some instruments in the sink. He gave a small wave as they entered. Vanessa, feeling very small indeed, timidly returned the gesture. Mickey's resultant smile was gentle and welcoming, and Vanessa felt slightly more at ease. The walls bore numerous paintings, many of which appeared to be handcrafted by previous attendees, lots of handprints, and finger paintings. Light streamed into the room and pooled on various surfaces. The surface that most caught Vanessa's attention was a tall examination table, which she was placed upon. Vanessa forced her attention onto the doctor, who now had a clipboard and had seated himself upon a spinning stool. With one impossibly large booted foot, he kicked off the baseboard and slid over to where Vanessa sat. He made a note on his clipboard and jotted down some numbers that appeared on a nearby screen. "While we get you examined, you and I are going to have a conversation. Okay?" The doctor tilted his head and looked at her above his glasses. It was a well-practiced look that firmly compelled Vanessa to obey. "Okay," she said in a very small voice. "Okay," confirmed the doctor. "And you're going to be a good girl for Mickey and I, aren't you?" Vanessa nodded genuinely. Her fall from the tree had cured her of any urge to run or to misbehave. All that remained was remorse. Feeling as she did, she would submit to whatever ministrations the doctor and his assistant saw fit to dispense. "So," began the doctor, "do you remember what I told you this morning, young lady?" "Yes, sir," said Vanessa. Dr. Gilbert wrapped a cuff around her arm and began to take her blood pressure. "What did I ask you?" More notation as the cuff finished deflating and was removed. "To be a good girl for Mickey." "Exactly. And? Were you a good girl?" Vanessa looked in Mickey's direction. He looked up from the sink with his eyebrows raised. Vanessa's gaze dropped back to her hands, which were knotted in her lap. She shook her head. The doctor paused in checking her reflexes to fix her with yet another well-practiced look. "No," admitted Vanessa, aloud. "No," agreed Dr. Gilbert. "You ran away instead and did something very dangerous." Mickey finished at the sink and turned to face them, his face of a similar disposition to the doctor's. Neither of them looked angry with her, but this was of little comfort to Vanessa. The disappointment in their eyes seemed almost worse. Having finished checking the girl's reflexes, the doctor rose from his stool and began to listen to her heartbeat, first through her chest, then between her shoulder blades. Once finished, the doctor bade Vanessa lay down, and she obeyed. She was measured, and the numbers notated. "Why were you so scared to come see us, honey?" asked Mickey, passing instruments to Dr. Gilbert, who set them down upon a nearby tray. "We're lovely." Mickey's stern expression softened, and he grinned at her. The doctor gave Mickey a soft smile. "The doctor looks frightening, but really, he's not." "Speak for yourself, Michael," said Dr. Gilbert, circling to the other side of the examination table. "I shall have to remind you how frightening I can be. In fact, I think you're due for a nice long reminder." Vanessa's eyes widened. It hadn't occurred to her that if Mickey acted more as a big brother than as a caregiver, then this was the logical dynamic between Dr. Gilbert and himself. Vanessa looked at Mickey, surprised, an involuntary smile growing on her face. He groaned, but smiled, bashfully. "The secret's out," he said, tapping Vanessa on the nose. "I'll never be seen as an authority figure again." In spite of her remaining anxiety, Vanessa gave a little giggle at Mickey's melodramatic performance. He took Vanessa's hands and swung the small girl into a sitting position. She gave another involuntary giggle. "It is a valid question, though," spoke the doctor, reseating himself on the stool. What about this appointment frightened you so? The doctor asked in a low, earnest tone. I didn't want help, said Vanessa. Help with what? Help to go. You know, is that your decision to make? Yes, said Vanessa, stubbornly. The doctor and Mickey both raised their eyebrows in surprise. Yes, repeated Mickey. Do you want to reconsider that answer? He asked, amusedly. It should be my decision. Perhaps, said the doctor, with a short incline of his head. But for the next month, it is not your decision, he said, sharing a glance with Mickey. It's ours. The doctor stooped down to Vanessa's eye level. And if your tummy is hurting and you need some medicine, he began, or if you've done something naughty and need some discipline, he paused to fix her with a referential expression, we are going to be here to give it to you, as uncomfortable as that might be. A lump formed in Vanessa's throat. She attempted to swallow it to no avail. It's time to take your medicine, little one, said the doctor, accepting a small bottle from Mickey. Despite her fear, Vanessa had experienced quite enough stern faces for that day, and was in no mood to disobey. Slowly and shakily, she moved to lay down upon the examination table. Vanessa whimpered as she reached with shaking hands to unclasp her overalls. The doctor paused and looked towards Mickey, who was stifling a grin for the second time that day. Miss Vanessa, what are you doing? Vanessa had unclasped the straps and rolled over onto her stomach by that point, her diapered bottom elevated. She buried her face in the crook of her elbow. I know it's going to be butt medicine, so just get it over with, she mumbled, her words muffled by skin. Vanessa lay there with her teeth clenched, trembling. Then she heard something she'd not yet heard. The doctor was laughing. The impossibly composed, intimidating Gothic doctor was lost in gales of laughter. Within moments, Mickey had dissolved into mirth as well. Dr. Gilbert took a step forward and scooped Vanessa up from her brave position. He set her on her bottom and held the bottle up so she was able to read the label. This one doesn't go in your bottom, sweetheart, he said, traces of laughter still in his voice. You take it by mouth. Vanessa nearly collapsed with relief. You mean I don't have to have butt medicine, as you so eloquently put it? No, little miss, you don't. Still smiling, the doctor prepared a large spoonful of the clear, viscous liquid. Vanessa opened her mouth immediately, such was her relief. The liquid laxative was unpleasant in both texture and taste, but as much as Vanessa disliked the taste of imitation vanilla, she preferred it to the alternative. Good girl, said Dr. Gilbert, smiling. So much fuss over a little spoonful of medicine. His face grew stern. As the appointment had progressed, the anxiety of a doctor's visit had been replaced with anxiety over that morning's misbehaviour. Vanessa couldn't believe she'd done something so careless to avoid this visit. She'd put herself and her friends in danger. She'd fallen from a tree. She'd caused everyone a great deal of worry, just to avoid a fate that hadn't even been destined to befall her. The guilt swelled in her chest, heavy and bitter. Soon she would have to face Miss Mia. The guilt grew heavier. She pictured her caregiver's face, creased with worry and looking down upon her, a mask of displeasure. I'm sorry, she said. I'm sorry I ran away. Thank you, little one. But there will be time for that in just a moment. Vanessa nodded solemnly. More words longed to pour from her mouth, but she kept her jaw clamped firmly shut. So, doctor, what's the prognosis? Asked Mickey in an exaggerated show of faux seriousness. How is our little patient? She seems in good health, Michael, said Dr. Gilbert, removing his gloves and tossing them into a nearby bin. You mean it? She's going to live? Asked Mickey, comically. I do believe she will, said the doctor, giving Mickey a fond smile. In that case, goodbye, my little patient. said Mickey brightly, removing his own gloves and slipping something into Dr. Gilbert's hand. The doctor instinctually slipped it into his pocket. "Goodbye?" asked Vanessa in genuine surprise. She looked between the two towering men. "It's over?" "It's over," nodded Dr. Gilbert, as Mickey hummed his affirmation. "It wasn't that bad, was it?" In truth, no. It hadn't been that bad. In fact, it hadn't been bad at all. The worst part had been the cloying taste of thick vanilla, which by now had dissipated from her tongue. "No," said Vanessa sheepishly, her shame and guilt deepening. There'd been no cause for panic. She hadn't needed to cause so much fuss, and yet she had. It wasn't bad. Vanessa could feel it. She was being delivered to her guardian, and she'd be immediately hauled over that big maternal lap that she simultaneously loved and feared. Feeling guilty as she did, Vanessa almost welcomed it. She deserved a spanking. Down the hall went Dr. Gilbert, cradling Vanessa close. With every step she made peace with her fate. By the time the two arrived at their destination, Vanessa had resolved to show the utmost grace and decorum when Miss Mia warmed her backside. She wouldn't kick or cry. She would be brave and take the spanking she deserved. Vanessa's resolve dissipated as soon as the doctor placed her down and shut the door behind him. He crossed to the single chair and made himself seated. "Now then, let's finish our conversation." "Our conversation?" stammered Vanessa. "Wait, I thought that Miss Mia was... Oh no." "Oh," said the doctor sympathetically. "Yes, I'm afraid." "Please, I can't," whispered Vanessa, her eyes welling up. "Can you remember what I told you this morning?" he asked, standing and starting towards the small girl. She shrank back. He reached her in moments and crouched before her. "You said you couldn't visit the doctor, but you were brave in the end, and now it's all over and done with. So, yes, you can, little one. You can, and you shall." His expression and tone were resolute. He stood and extended a massive hand to Vanessa, who stared woodenly up at him. "Come, little miss. It's time to be brave." Vanessa forced herself to obey. Her limbs felt as if they were welded in place. It felt near impossible to raise her hand towards the doctor's large palm, but she was somehow able to urge her muscles into action. Dr. Gilbert gently guided her back to his previous seat and was seated. His lap looked prohibitively far from the ground. She felt there was no way she would be able to survive a spanking from this man. Surely he would snap her in half. Vanessa wasn't concerned about his temper. He had seemed positively dangerous earlier when attempting to coax them from the tree, but Vanessa had never felt in danger of Dr. Gilbert. She had felt in danger of falling from such a foolish and precarious hiding place, and she'd felt in danger of a sincere spanking when she got down from said foolish and precarious hiding place. But not of the doctor. What the doctor might do, however, was an entirely different story. What the doctor did was wholly unexpected. He leaned down and lifted Vanessa into the air, settling her right side up in his lap. The relief was swift, such so that Vanessa gave an audible sigh. "Where were we?" he asked. "We were talking," said Vanessa. "Ah, yes. So we were," he said, in a conversational tone, reclining slightly. "Now what were we talking about, little miss?" Vanessa hung her head. "What I did today," she said, feeling very small and ashamed. "Ah, and what was that?" asked Dr. Gilbert, gently. "I," said Vanessa, struggling but making a strong attempt to look him in the eye. I ran away from my appointment." Yes, you did, he said, giving a short nod. That was a very naughty thing to do. Yes, sir, mumbled Vanessa. Do you know what happens when you're a naughty girl? Vanessa cringed, disliking the phrasing immensely. Yes, said Vanessa, unwilling to expand on her answer and speak such cloying words. Vanessa, prompted Dr. Gilbert, I do not like to repeat myself. I get spanked by Miss Mia, she said, pointedly, without a hint of her usual polite tone. Dr. Gilbert was mildly surprised by this show of insolence. This little one had never shown such behaviour with him before. Until now, Vanessa had been frozen with fear around him. It made sense. Little ones often elected to tempt fate at this 11th hour. It was usually something about the inevitability of what was about to befall them, or an attempt to provoke a strong response to quell the little one's guilt. In any event, Vanessa's fate was inevitable, and she'd certainly earned herself a very strong lesson on the dangers of scaling trees. Usually, yes, but since you disobeyed me today, I will be the one seeing to your discipline. With that reasonable explanation, all of the fight went out of the small girl. She deflated and returned quickly to her usual disposition, gentle, cautious, and mildly alarmed. Oh, said Vanessa, her brows knitting together. That makes sense. Do you have any questions you'd like to ask me before we begin? Vanessa had several. What would it be like? How hard did he spank? Would he cuddle her afterwards? Comfort her? Rub her back and lavish gentle, sweet praise on her for being a good girl who took her spanking well? Vanessa swallowed hard. Lost in thought, she gave no response. Would it help to know what to expect? He asked, inclining his head and peering at her over the top of his glasses. Oh. I stood on my glasses the other day, so I don't have glasses unless I go. Will it help to know? No, see that? Sorry. She nodded. She desperately wanted to know. All right, he said. I shall put you over my knee and remove your diaper. Vanessa groaned and buried her face in her hands, the imagery too humiliating to dwell on. I will place my hand on your back, and I will spank you. While I'm spanking you, I would like you to think about what happened today. A cold shiver went down Vanessa's spine. I expect little ones to squirm a little while they're over my knee, but if you get too restless and try to kick your way off, I will hold your hands behind your back. Vanessa didn't relish this thought. She was determined to never experience the helplessness that would go along with such an action. I'd also like you to know that I do not tolerate insolence. While you are over my knee, we will both address each other with respect. Do you understand? Yes, whimpered Vanessa, her face still hidden behind her palms. This snapshot of what to expect had done little to quell her fears. And when your spanking is over, I shall hold you close until you're calm and bring you to your caregiver. Vanessa was slightly cheered at the prospect of the comfort set to follow the spanking, but the fear was still stronger. However strong the fear, the little girl was resolute. Vanessa took a deep breath and looked bravely upward. I'm ready. That's a brave girl, Dr. Gilbert had said, moments before placing his hands neath Vanessa's arms and upending her across his broad lap. He made short work of the diaper she wore. She was bare-bottomed over his knee within 10 seconds. As promised, a large hand was placed on her back, the fingers of which curling around her waist, holding her firmly in place. Dr. Gilbert gave her bottom a series of gentle pats that made Vanessa moan and tuck her head into arms folded above her head. Let's begin, said the doctor, and raised his hand. He brought it down with an almighty crash onto Vanessa's backside. She bit her lip and bore 10 exceedingly powerful swats before she broke and gave a loud sob, kicking her legs as she did so. This was too much. This was way worse than a spanking from Miss Mia. She wouldn't be able to handle a minute at this rate. Now that I have your attention, little miss, I would like you to think about the naughty thing that you did today. Dr. Gilbert slowed his pace and intensity, and Vanessa relaxed despite curling toes, deeply grateful for the respite. She shakily nodded her head. I gave you a direction, little one, chided Dr. Gilbert, his descending hand quickening for a moment before Vanessa spluttered, Yes, sir. Good girl. Vanessa grit her teeth and wiggled her toes. Her fists curled into tight balls. It was difficult to summon the brain power to think about the events leading up to her spanking. Her mind was consumed with the red-hot waves burning across her backside. She had been very dangerous. She'd put her friends in danger. She'd almost fallen from a tree. She'd disobeyed the doctor and Mickey. She'd made Miss Emily worry. And she had disobeyed Miss Mia's biggest rule. As she contemplated this last, crushing fact, tears began to stream down Vanessa's cheeks. Dr. Gilbert's hand paddled her strongly and ceaselessly. Vanessa's sobs turned to howls as he warmed her bottom from a pale pink to a shiny rose. All right, little miss. You've had a while to think, said the doctor, still spanking firmly. I'd like you to tell me why you're being spanked. 'Cause I ran away. I would like you to tell me the whole story. I've already said it. I ran away and made everyone sad. Please stop spanking me. Vanessa gave a hard kick, overcome with shame. Miss Vanessa, said the doctor in a low tone, do you remember what I said about insolence? Yes, sir, sobbed Vanessa. We talk with respect to each other. I'm sorry. Good girl. If you would like to reconsider your answer, now is the time. I was scared of having a enema. Mamina! Ah! An enema, supplied the doctor, helpfully. Enema, agreed the little girl, who was trying her hardest not to leap off the doctor's lap. So I went and I climbed a tree and Piper and Aiden came too, which was very dangerous. Would you agree? Yes, sir, Vanessa sobbed. Being dangerous. Too little to climb trees. Very true, he nodded, spanking methodically. Keep going, please. You're doing very well. Then you came and told us to get down and we didn't. Yes. That was certainly very naughty. Can't disobey, stammered Vanessa, in a very quiet voice. That's right. You can't disobey, said the doctor, rubbing calming circles onto her back that very nearly took her mind away from the fire on her backside. And I fell out of the tree. Yes, you did. Which is exactly why it was so dangerous for you to climb so high. Dr. Gilbert had slowed his spanks down just a touch. Vanessa gave a shudder, still openly weeping as her spanking continued. Dangerous, agreed Vanessa. Sorry, she cried. Big sorry. I know, little one. I caught you, but I shudder to think of what might have happened if I hadn't, he said, his firm voice echoing in her ears. An unhappy little noise escaped from Vanessa's mouth. She knew. She had been very lucky. At the end of the day, as painful and humbling as this was, she would prefer a scorched bottom to broken bones. So far, we have 3 naughty things that have earned you a spanking. Do you remember what they were? Dr. Gilbert asked, his hand still descending slowly but meaningfully. I ran away. I did a danger, said Vanessa, struggling to form coherent thoughts in her guilt-addled brain. I disobeyed you. The doctor's spanks were very light now, but still felt sharp to the little girl's tender backside. And there was one more thing, honey. Can you think of what that might be? Vanessa was genuinely stumped. Her heart pounded along with her throbbing bottom as she frantically searched her memory for anything that could be considered worthy of a spanking. "Would you like some help, little miss?" he asked, interrupting her train of thought.
"Yes, please. I can't think right."
You decided that your tummy pain wasn't serious enough to visit a doctor, said the doctor, still swatting firmly enough to cause small leg kicks on the part of Vanessa. You have to learn that while you're here with us, it is not your place to make decisions. Vanessa gave a muffled wail. Though the concept of a life lived decision-free was tempting, Vanessa found it difficult to accept this concept in reality. You are to use your words if your tummy hurts. You are to use your words if you are frightened. Otherwise, we won't be able to help you. You are here to be looked after. Sometimes being looked after is scary, and so is asking for help. But I would prefer you to try to be brave and talk to us instead of hiding up a tree. Dr. Gilbert finished this sentence with 4 increasingly firm smacks to Vanessa's thoroughly scorched bottom, causing her to arch her back and cry out, "Okay, little miss, what do you say when you've been naughty?"
I'm sorry, Dr. Gill. Sorry. Big sorry.
The doctor let Vanessa calm down for a moment. He rubbed circles on her back and punished bottom as her little sobs became softer and softer. Vanessa had relaxed and given in to the internal voice urging her to submit. She lay unmoving over the big man's lap, lost in the sensations of a warm hand caressing her equally warm backside. By the time the doctor had set her upright, she had progressed completely into a quiet, docile little girl state. She craved comfort, a heaviness still weighing on her mind. She immediately burrowed into his embrace when she realized where she'd been shifted. The doctor enfolded her in his long arms and began to stroke her hair. She was grateful for this. His hand shrouded her tear-streaked face from view. "I am very proud of you, little miss," he said in a low tone. "You took your spanking very well." Vanessa's guilt had somewhat been alleviated, but she still carried a large amount for disobeying her caregiver, who she was rapidly becoming attached to.
"Thank you,"
mumbled Vanessa through her tears. She felt the doctor shift with concern. He manually maneuvered her backwards, one hand on each of her shoulders. He looked at her critically. "What's happening, little one?" he asked, concerned. "What's on your mind?"
"Nothing. Everything's fine,"
said Vanessa. She angrily wiped a tear away with the back of her hand in the universally recognized symbol for everything is not fine. Dr. Gilbert raised a brow. "I can turn you right back over my knee if you're going to tell me fibs, Miss Vanessa."
"Oh no, please no,"
she blurted out.
I broke Miss Mia's biggest rule. She told me I would be in big trouble if I tried to do something big dangerous ever again."
Vanessa's bottom lip began to tremble.
"And now she's not gonna want to look after me anymore. She's gonna be mad and she won't talk to me or hug me or kiss me on the forehead ever again."
Vanessa collapsed against Dr. Gilbert's chest and began to weep anew. "Little miss," said the doctor, who had immediately enclosed his arms around Vanessa as soon as she'd buried her face in his shirt. "That is not true. Why would you think your Miss Mia would stop caring for you?"
"Because,"
cried Vanessa,
"she said that if I ever did anything dangerous again, I'd be in big trouble and get a spanking."
"Ah, I see," said the doctor, rocking Vanessa gently. "But I've just given you a spanking, and I'm still looking after you."
"Oh, that's different,"
groaned Vanessa. "How is that different, little miss? You did something dangerous, and you bravely took your spanking. You've been forgiven, and I am comforting you. I am not angry with you, and I would be willing to bet that your Miss Mia isn't either.
She's gonna hate me,
moaned Vanessa. Vanessa, honey, came a voice from across the room. Miss Mia was perched on the low shelf that sat across from them, her arms loosely folded over her chest. Vanessa's heart leapt. How long had she been there? I don't think that I could ever hate you. Vanessa was too startled to dwell on the humiliation involved in noticing Miss Mia's presence. I'm not angry with you, honey, she said, straightening to a stand. I'm proud of you. She crossed the room and crouched next to them. From what I saw, you were a very good girl during your spanking. There was the humiliation. Vanessa flushed scarlet. How long were you watching? Stammered Vanessa, attempting to remember what she had said in her well-spanked and slightly delirious state. Long enough, baby girl. Miss Mia reached out and tapped Vanessa's nose, causing it to crinkle as she smiled. Long enough to know that you were very brave. The doctor nodded his head and hummed his agreement, a lock of dark hair flopping over his shoulder. She was. He continued to rub slow, even circles on the little girl's back. Vanessa looked up at him, smiling shyly, blushing still. He gave... Did you hear that bird? Vanessa looked up at him, smiling shyly, blushing still. He gave her a soft smile in return. I'll let you two finish up in here, okay? Said Miss Mia, straightening up. I'll see you soon, honey. She leant in and placed a soft, sweet kiss on Vanessa's forehead. Vanessa felt a pang of anxiety once the afterglow of the kiss had faded. She looked up at Dr. Gilbert, who regarded her gently. So, little miss, he began, leaning back slightly in his seat. What did we learn today? No doing dangers, said Vanessa, immediately. No trees, no tall things, no running away. Dr. Gilbert nodded sagely. Exactly. Keep going, please. You're doing very well. No talking back, said Vanessa, emphatically. And we talk to each other with respect. Vanessa looked at her toes as she contemplated the next lesson she'd learned. Gotta use my words if I have a feeling. Respect and communication. Two very important things, little miss, nodded Dr. Gilbert. And I don't get to make decisions. That's your job. Very good, little one. Very good indeed. Vanessa relaxed against the doctor's broad chest. He stroked her hair and murmured small praises. She thought it strange that she could be comforted by this man who was causing her to wail moments earlier, and glanced upwards. His resultant smile was warm and lazy, and it filled her stomach with shy, satisfied bubbles. Dr. Gilbert wasn't cruel, nor was he unfair. She had misbehaved, and was disciplined fairly for it. Perhaps this was why she felt contented. She still felt some semblance of foreboding about the doctor, but the initial fear she had felt was long gone. All that remained inside her was childlike submission and the deep urge to take a nap. I think Mickey was right, sighed Vanessa, dreamily, letting her eyes close. Oh? Asked the doctor, tilting his head to the left and regarding her with a soft amusement. Yeah, you're not scary, she mumbled, followed by a little yawn. Her eyes remained closed. Dr. Gilbert chuckled gently. I am glad to hear it. Vanessa looked around the room when she awoke, slightly startled. The nursery was dimly lit, but she could make out Miss Mia's silhouette against her cubicle wall. She sat in the armchair. A small paperback book sat unopened on her floral-patterned lap, An involuntary smile crept across Vanessa's face as she registered her caregiver's presence. "Well, hello, sleepy girl," said Miss Mia, rising from the chair and setting her book aside. She strode to Vanessa's side and swiftly retrieved her from the crib. Vanessa didn't answer verbally, merely pressed her face into Miss Mia's blouse. "Someone's had a big day, haven't they?" "Mm-hmm," mumbled Vanessa, shyness washing over her. She didn't particularly want to address the events of that day, given the state of her bottom. Throbbed inside her diaper, a humbling reminder of her misbehavior. Miss Mia placed a large palm on the back of the little girl's head and stroked her hair. "I'm sorry," mumbled Vanessa, her face still buried in Miss Mia's blouse. "It's okay, honey," she said, turning from Vanessa's cubicle and striding down the hallway. "But I broke your big rule," said Vanessa, her voice catching in her throat as she looked timidly upwards. "And you've been disciplined, baby girl," said Miss Mia, continuing down the hallway and entering the dining hall. "But, no buts, darling," she said, giving Vanessa a series of soft pats on her diapered bottom. Vanessa winced, the skin still sore from her spanking. "Except this one," chuckled Miss Mia. Vanessa giggled in spite of herself, and the concern began to disappear from her face. "You did something naughty. You've been disciplined, and that's all there is to it." Miss Mia leaned down and placed a light kiss on Vanessa's brow. Vanessa gave Miss Mia a wobbly smile, relief flooding her belly. "And now it's time for dinner." Sat in her high chair with a bib fastened around her neck, Vanessa gazed about the room. The walls of the dining room were emblazoned with nursery rhyme characters. Jack and Jill walked uphill, hand in hand, unaware of the danger set to befall them in their rhyme. The dish and the spoon gazed up at the cow, surrounded by stars. Miss Muffet sat happily munching in a corner, the spider nowhere to be seen. A large wooden table took up the majority of the room. Matching high chairs surrounded it, and all but one was currently occupied. Piper sat to the right of Vanessa, Frank and Danny to the left. Only Aidan remained absent. Piper wriggled impatiently in her chair, stopping only when Ethan appeared at her side to stare at her with a mixture of amusement and warning. She grinned cheekily at him, but ceased her squirming. Vanessa and Piper shared a sober smile, relieved to be done with the less pleasant parts of the day. "I just want to know why you'd think it'd be a good idea to climb a tree," said Frank, breaking the silence and drawing a less than pleased expression from Piper. "Aren't you the one who's constantly telling us they're always watching?" Vanessa's stomach started to form knots. She didn't want the others knowing why she'd tried to run away from her appointment. "I am Francois," said Piper, in a faux prim tone, straightening in her high chair. "I cannot possibly think what must have come over me." She grinned conspiratorially at Vanessa, who realized her secret was safe. She relaxed visibly and returned the expression. "But," began Frank, and was silenced when Danny deployed a swift tap to his arm. "Don't," said Danny mildly, and Frank glared. Frank attempted to respond, but was cut off when Mickey appeared with a stack of melamine bowls, which he placed on the tray of each high chair. "Boys, be nice." "Yeah, Frank, be nice," growled Piper.
Crowed
Piper. "Piper, you be nice too." Piper lowered her head when Mickey fixed her with a particularly stern expression, an uncharacteristically dark blush colouring her cheeks. "Everyone should be nice," came Miss Emily's voice as she entered the room, Aidan in her arms. Aidan's copper hair was cowlicked and swept into a crest, not unlike that of a cockatoo. He looked freshly awoken, a confused look in his hooded eyes as he was lowered into the remaining high chair. He winced as his bottom came into contact with the hard wood. "I think you all are anyway." Frank remained silent, glowering at his bowl. Danny rolled his eyes. "Aidan is nice," said Miss Emily, placing a hand on his unkempt head. "Danny is nice, and Frank is nice too," she declared. "Piper is nice, and so is Vanessa," she said, beaming around the table at the little ones. "Mickey, are you nice?" Mickey, still bustling about the table with cutlery and glasses, made a show of thinking about the question. "Yes," he said, finally, laying down the last fork on Vanessa's tray. "I think so." "Gil, are you nice?" Vanessa nodded her head heartily, then blushing heavily as she realized he'd noticed. He smiled indulgently at her before he took a seat at the table. "I'm not sure. Perhaps. Mia, are you nice?" Vanessa nodded emphatically at her caregiver, who was taking a seat beside her high chair. "I try to be," she said. "Emily, I know for a fact that you're nice." Miss Emily beamed at her colleague as she took her seat beside Aidan. "There we have it. We're all nice." Dinner was bolognese, atop dinosaur-shaped noodles. Predictably, more sauce ended up on Aidan's clothes than in his mouth where it belonged. Vanessa hadn't felt all that hungry, but found that she was ravenous as she began to eat. She devoured the entire bowl in a matter of minutes. Frank, still sulking from the earlier exchange, picked at his food until a sharp expression from the doctor compelled him to empty his bowl. Satisfied, and with full bellies, the little ones were carried from the dining room and into what appeared to be a lounge. Several couches lined the walls, and a patchwork of blankets had been laid out all over the floor. The television was turned on, and they were set down in front of a cartoon show featuring some form of anthropomorphic bear. Vanessa laid her head on one of the many pillows that had been scattered across the floor and attempted to focus on the screen. As hard as she tried, she couldn't summon the attention necessary to focus on the plot. From her spot on the floor, she could see directly out the window. The sun was cresting over the mountains in the distance, their white-capped peaks glinting in the orange-pink glow. Miss Mia, who sat on one of the adjacent couches, caught her eye. Vanessa sat up and pointed out the window. "Would you like a closer look?" she asked in a low voice, so as to not disturb the others. Vanessa nodded. Her attempt at secrecy was fruitless, however, and the others nodded with as much fervour as Vanessa had. Miss Mia chuckled softly and motioned for the little ones to follow her across the room. Miss Mia lifted the little ones one by one onto the couch that sat below the window. The group crowded around and craned their necks to take in the view. From this closer position, Vanessa was able to see the ocean. By this point, the sun had reached the horizon and had begun to sink slowly beneath the waves. "What's that?" asked Aidan, pointing to the middle distance. "Down by the shore?" asked Miss Mia, orienting her head to match Aidan's eyeline. "That's a boat." Aidan gasped loudly, with unbridled joy. "The boat! The boat from the brochure!" Miss Mia shushed him gently, still smiling. "The very same," she said, nodding. "We'll get to go for a ride on it soon." "When?" asked Frank, with just a hair too much enthusiasm. He sobered quickly, attempting to hide his hopeful expression. "Very soon, honey." There was no hiding the sparkle that appeared in his eyes. "It might be a bit too dark now, but if you look over there, you might be able to see a cabin on the mountain top," said Miss Mia. Vanessa made no attempt to hide her hope. It had long been a dream of hers to one day visit the snow. "Do we get to go there?" she asked. "I'm not sure, darling," said Miss Mia. "It depends." "On what?" asked Aidan, who fairly bounced with excitement. "On if you're good or not," she said. "We only bring the very best little ones to the mountain." Miss Mia allowed the group to gaze out at the park and ask questions for a few more minutes before shepherding them back to the blankets for some quiet time. As she lay down in her nest of blankets, Vanessa smiled to herself. Her eyes grew heavy, and she let her lids droop closed. And for the very first time since her arrival, Vanessa felt excited for the adventures to come. Thank you for listening, everybody. I hope you enjoyed that. Yeah, like I said, I'll be just in the comments just milling about for a little while. If you want to ask me some questions, that would be awesome. Okay, I'll see you guys after the move is finished. I can't wait. Bye everybody.